The ripple effects of Korea's political unrest on its economy have received quite a bit of both local and international media attention. That being said, on Press Perspective today, we touch upon this reality, especially amid the return of the Trump administration. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Thursday, January 16th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Today we start with the latest on the local political front amid the president's arrest and trial before touching upon the economic impact of this leadership vacuum. For more on this, I have Steven Borowiec with Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Steven, welcome back.
Thanks, you. Good to be here.
I also have Professor Kim Yong-Jin at Sogang University. Live on the line. Professor Kim, it's good to have you on.
Good evening.
Right, Stephen, we'll start here. Let's begin with the latest from the Constitutional Court, where a second hearing took place this afternoon for the impeachment trial against President Yoon Suk-yeol. I understand it was longer than the first session, which took, and do correct me if I'm wrong, 4 minutes was it for the first session?
Yeah, so that was a low bar. So the hearing did go ahead. We don't have a ton of info as to specifically what went on, like what was said, but the kind of takeaway, I think, is that it represents a continued refusal of Yoon and his team to really recognize the legitimacy of this process. His representatives have continued to say that they don't see themselves participating in this. Yoon, as we all know, was just recently arrested. So while he's detained, I'm not quite sure what the intricacies are there, if he could have attended or not. But he wasn't there, and we'll have to see. I believe there's another hearing scheduled for, I think it's Tuesday of next week. So perhaps we'll get a little bit more of a substantive outcome then.
Right, next Tuesday at 2 o'clock, a third hearing at the Constitutional Court then. Meanwhile, Stephen, what were some of the updates surrounding the arrest that you mentioned of the president by anti-corruption investigators, which took place, of course, Wednesday morning? His first set of questions were Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, and I believe he was in custody through last night. And today his lawyer sent a message to reporters that I received where he said that Yoon would not be undergoing any questioning today. He did not specify specifically why that was, like why they had made that decision, or if Yoon was perhaps for health reasons or some other reasons he was unable to. But I believe that today, right around quite soon, a court is going to be ruling on the validity of Yoon's continued detention, whether or not he can remain in custody. I think the terms of the initial arrest stipulate that it's 48 hours that he could remain in detention for, and then after that, the investigators would have to seek and receive a warrant for his continued detention. His legal team have tried to have him removed from custody, had tried to, I'm not sure the legal term, perhaps it's injunction. They've sought an injunction on his continued detention. So we'll see how things go from here. I mean, I wonder if at the end of this very kind of arduous process that led up to his arrest, a quite historic arrest, the first ever arrest of a sitting South Korean president, if that will like represent a real step forward in the investigation and towards having some kind of clarity, or if we could find ourselves back in the kind of dispute that's been going on for the past few weeks.
Right, and while we wait for those answers, Professor Kim, what do you suppose have been the economic repercussions of Korea's political unrest thus far?
Well, the political unrest and stability affect, Korean economy, not only Korean economy when there is, political unrest and stability, all the economies might be affected, right? The short-lived martial law declaration and the impeachment of President Yoon had been affecting Korean economy in very, very negative ways. First of all, the martial law declaration and the impeachment hurt the economic growth in the fourth quarter of last year, and then the potential impact on this year's growth rate. Korean consumers lost confidence about the economic future of Korea, which led to low consumption. Even before the event, Korean economy was in a bad shape, and the impeachment process hit hard the economy in a very negative way. And secondly, due to the lowered economic growth rate, the unemployment rate, increased from 2.7% in November to 3.7% in December. Thirdly, the political instability added more volatility to foreign exchange rate. Korean won has been, devaluated by about 5% after the martial law declaration. Absolutely, strong dollar affected the weakening won value, but the political instability also contributed to it negatively. And finally, the political instability is affecting companies' business planning process. Many companies do not know what to do this year in this situation. They could not, decide what kind of investment they would do, what kind of plans they would make, which is causing another uncertainty.
Right. And before we delve into each company's investment plans for this year, Professor Kim, I'd like to touch upon a decision by the Bank of Korea today. It has decided to hold its benchmark interest rate steady at 3%, despite earlier expectations for a rate cut. Professor Kim, what is your interpretation of the decision to hold the rate steady?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the BOK decided to freeze the base rate at 3% per year. Many experts say it is unexpected in whole, but to me it was very clear. The key reason for this decision is the current high exchange rate. I suppose that the BOK experienced a dilemma before the decision making was very tough. If it considers the economies only, a rate cut is a better decision. However, when the foreign exchange rate is too high at the moment, the rate cut may increase the volatility in the exchange rate to end up with higher exchange rate due to the interest gap with the United States. The high exchange rate will negatively affect domestic prices and financial stability, which will lead to the issue of international credibility.
Right. Steven, a major variable for the South Korean economy this year, of course, is the shift in U.S. trade policy, which is probably also the case for countries like Canada, of course. Now, that being said, we've been told that a national economic emergency declaration may be made by the incoming Trump administration. What exactly does that mean, and what can we expect?
I just want to flag, we got to talk about what might this mean, because we can't be totally sure that he's going to do this. This is not like something that Trump has come out and said that he's going to do, or that, we haven't broken down the path that would lead to this. But the real kind of crux of this is that in an emergency scenario, a leader has more power. And so if Trump can kind of present a case whereby he needs to declare this emergency on national security grounds, if he can present some kind of, some outside threat that would give him a pretext for doing this, it would give him the authority to set tariffs exactly how he might want to set them, or like at what percentage. That's normally not a power that the executive level of the government can exercise freely. As I've said before, in this whole question of tariffs, Professor Kim can talk about this a little better than me. I'd love to hear even one economic expert talk about how blanket across-the-board tariffs are a good idea, because they have all kinds of economic blowback and all kinds of distortions. American consumers love cheap goods. American consumers want things to be produced domestically. Tariffs would make all of that a lot more complicated and a lot more difficult. So I don't know if Trump is going to either choose or be able to execute these tariffs, but it's definitely a really interesting question, and something that we'll all have to be watching for in the coming weeks.
Right, then let's toss it to Professor Kim. Now, Mr. Trump, Professor Kim, had earlier floated the idea of imposing blanket tariffs of between 10 and 20% on all U.S. imports. What does this mean for Korea's exports of cars and ships, for starters, Professor Kim?
Right. No, before I answer to the question, like Stephen mentioned, the economic emergency declaration, national economic emergency declaration, U.S. economy is, the best in the world, right? And then Trump suddenly said, we'll, consider a national economic emergency declaration. That means, I'm gonna impose those kind of tariff, blanket tariff for all of the product we imported from all of the world. That's the basic reason. The President-elect Trump spoke about the minimum tariff of 10 to 20% on all imported goods, and 60% or higher on shipment from China many times during 2024 presidential campaign and after he was elected as president of the U.S. The most important export items of Korea to the U.S. are cars and chips. If the U.S. government imposes 10 to 20% tariff on those products, the price of the product increases to make them expensive by 10 to 20%. Compared to previous years and compared to other the domestically produced product, which will weaken the competitiveness of those products in the U.S. market, and in turn lower the demand of the product imported from Korea. And Korean car and chip makers will face the drop in their export to the U.S. in the long term. Fortunately, here we have one solution. So members of the President-elect Trump's incoming economic team are discussing slowly ramping up tariff month by month, which is a gradual approach aimed at boosting negotiating leverage while helping avoid a spike in inflation. Absolutely, when he imposed the blanket tariff all of the product, the domestic price, consumer price in the U.S. will hike up. So it will cause another inflation. So he wants to avoid that situation with a gradual approach.
Right, a gradual approach for tariffs then. Well, keeping that in mind, Korean automaker Steven Hyundai Motor Group has been seeking to reach out to the incoming Trump administration. What more can you share?
Well, it's natural that companies would reach out to any incoming administration in any big important country and try to establish direct contact with the influential people in this administration and be able to make their case in person. Though there are reports that Hyundai made a donation of about $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund, and I think that's the first time they've done something like that. But taking a step back, we have to ask questions about the implementation of tariffs, and that in the United States, companies and producers can apply for exceptions. They can come to the relevant authorities and they can say, we need exemption from the way that these things are generally applied because we contribute this to the economy. We're going to invest this much in the country. We employ this much people. And what this really does, like what tariffs have the effect of doing, is becoming a kind of tradable commodity where companies can appeal and ask for special treatment and prevent benefits. And so I don't think I'm being overly cynical and wondering that maybe this is the reason that Trump wants to put forth these tariffs, because it creates this incentive for companies to come and kiss his ring and make promises and pledge that they're going to invest and they're going to do things the way that he wants them done. And I guess for a Korean company or any kind of overseas company, they have to kind of play this game. And I think we're going to see quite a lot of that going ahead.
Right, and speaking about investments, Professor Kim, Hyundai invested heavily in the U.S. to qualify for EV tax credits under the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act. What is the fate of such investment under the incoming Trump administration, do you think?
Well, like Stephen mentioned, it's a really, really difficult situation for, Korean companies, and not only Korean companies, all the companies invested in the U.S., heavily under Biden administration. But, first of all, I'd like to deliver a good news. The electric vehicles from Hyundai Motor Group are now eligible for tax credits, of up to $7,500 per car under the Inflation Reduction Act, right? Which might be, short-lived, after Trump, power in the power. This is first time the South Korean automakers model have been qualified for the program. European automakers such as Volkswagen and Audi were excluded for the second consecutive years. Also, Jeep and Rivian, which qualified in 2023, were absent from this year's list. Anyway, this IRA was enacted in 2022, is a landmark, U.S. law aimed at strengthening domestic clean energy industries, including electric vehicles, solar power, and wind energies. Well, however, the President-elect Trump vote to cancel the law with saying that the law is like a green scam or green fraud. He does not believe any kind of climate change. And also he will take the money back, from the companies which got the U.S. subsidies. I'm not sure, whether Mr. Trump will do it right away, right after he is in the power, or have a little bit more time to soothe the voters for him, who live mostly in the Rust Belt and Sunshine Belt. What I'm sure is that he will do it someday in the future, not right away, but with targeting at specific areas, narrowing the focus of the getting rid of that IRA specific policies.
Right. Meanwhile, Stephen, one Korean industry that has its fingers crossed for brighter business prospects under the incoming Trump administration appears to be the shipbuilding industry here in Korea, which you covered as well. Do tell us a bit about your coverage.
I think what made me want to write about it was the shipbuilding is just a fascinating industry, just generally the cyclical nature of it. And if you've ever been to one of these shipyards in Ulsan or Gyeonggi-do, they're really impressive, just the scale of the work involved. It's really something to behold. So what drew me to the topic was this, Trump has come out and said that he kind of invites collaboration with South Korean shipbuilders to sort of revive the U.S. shipbuilding industry, which is a shell of what it once was. And Korean companies like Hanwha Ocean have recently made some significant inroads there. They've bought up some ports there and some facilities. And there are rumblings that they could collaborate with the U.S. Navy and they could expand their what in the industry is called MRO, which is maintenance, repair, and overhaul. And so in some senses, there's quite a boom going on in the shipbuilding sector, but there are these old issues. Shipbuilding, quite interestingly, has the highest rate of indirectly employed labor of any industry in South Korea. It's more than 60%. And so I interviewed some welders and some guys who have been working on these shipyards in places like Gyeonggi-do for a very long time, and they have this really kind of challenging scenario where they've worked on these shipyards for a very long time, but they're not directly employed by these companies, so they have no direct channel to negotiate for a larger share of the revenue that's coming in. And so the kind of theme of my article was that this is an industry that has a very promising outlook on the face of things, but is kind of plagued by these old issues of the cyclical nature of the industry, these labor unrest, and a few other things. So it was an interesting time to take a deep dive into shipbuilding.
Definitely some tasks that the government here can look into as well then. Professor Kim, what more can you tell us about Korea's shipbuilding industry? I mean, it was highly praised by Mr. Trump during talks with President Yoon Suk-yeol following his election victory last November, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of countries which can build all that kind of big ships. The U.S. already lost all of the shipbuilding capability. They don't have docks and yard, and so. But the thing is that Mr. Trump feels that the U.S. shipbuilding is quite far behind China, and he wants to enhance the U.S. shipbuilding capacity and amid the intensifying rivalry with China. China is known to have over 230 times the shipbuilding capacity of the U.S. Think about it, they are rival. The China, but they don't have capacity. But the only country which has the commensurable capability in shipbuilding is Korea. So absolutely, Korean shipbuilders now experiencing the lack of laborers and lack of expertise. And so if, Mr. Trump asked this company, Korean shipbuilding companies, to come to the U.S. to build all that kind of shipbuilding capability in the U.S., that would be very troublesome. But anyway, Korean shipbuilders may have to really deliberate the way of collaborating with the U.S. because we can leverage this shipbuilding capabilities to lower the tariff, and then the canceling out of the IRAs. So anyway, especially in the Navy, naval vessels, the U.S. government administration might need the most. So we may have give them the help about those, and then we have to think about how can we move out those capabilities to the U.S. and some of the part we keep within the Korean territory.
Right, I see. So that's something to think about then. Steven, with regard to Trump tariffs, and for the sake of comparison, do tell us a bit about this. Now, he's spoken about slapping Canada with a 25% tariff. What is Canada's response?
Well, let me just say that Canada is not quite to the extent that Korea is, but also in a period of political uncertainty. So we don't quite, I think it's quite hard for the Canadian government to coordinate what's happening right now, because there'll probably be an election soon, and the current prime minister is on his way out. But they've floated the possibility of enacting kind of tit-for-tat tariffs, taking a kind of antagonistic approach. I just would want to say that Canada and the U.S. have what is arguably the best trading relationship in human history. I mean, these are two allies that have just an incredibly mutually beneficial trade relationship. You have oil going south into the U.S. You have all kinds of consumer goods going back and forth. It's been the huge part of the economy in both countries, and so I think it's unfortunate to see the leadership in both countries speaking in this kind of language of antagonism, well, we're going to take advantage of you, although we'll take advantage of you back. I mean, that's useful for politicians, but it's not good from an economic perspective. It's not going to make anybody's life better economically. It's not going to raise living standards. It's not going to solve inflation. It's not going to solve the housing crises in either of these countries. So I hope that cooler heads will prevail, and I hope that we don't see this kind of trade war happening between two historically trade partners.
Of course not. This is an impromptu question, Steven. Speaking as a Canadian journalist, how do you respond to Trump's talk about Canada possibly being the 51 states of the U.S.?
Well, let me make sure that my own cooler head prevails here. I think that's not a way that an ally should talk to another ally. I think it's condescending, and Canada has its own unique history. It has its own unique identity.
You're right, for sure, of course.
I'm not a fan of it. Let me stop there.
Right, all right. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today.
Okay, great.
But thank you so much for taking my impromptu question, and thank you very much for your time and your thoughts, Steven.
Thank you.
And Professor Kim, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you for having me.
Right, well, on that note, we say goodbye for this Thursday. We return same time tomorrow, that is Friday. Do join us then.